Hello and welcome to the CNBC-TV18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan. India's growing internet economy roars towards $1 trillion by 2030. That's the roaring headline that's coming in from the Google Temasek Bain report. But there is a lot of other data and a lot of other nuance that we need to consider looking at as well. Sample this just for context. If you take a look at India versus other large digital economies, what's the trend that the report highlights? The rise in online usage has put India ahead of the world's largest digital economies. Indians spend an average 6.5 hours online a day. That's higher than China, but it's still lower than the US. The highest daily social media usage is in India of 2.8 hours versus the global average of 2.5 hours. At least 1.6 hours are spent daily watching online videos, and that number is 1.3 hours in the US. With average 65 yearly digital payments per person, India is ahead of both China and the US. Well, to talk about the highlights of the report, and more importantly, what India's internet economy could look like by 2030, I have with me special guests today. Sanjay, thanks very much for joining us. Vishesh and Parijat, appreciate your time as well here on this conversation. I'm going to ask the three of you the first opening question, and Sanjay, I'll start by asking you. I just give a very quick snapshot of some of the numbers that the report highlights. What, to your mind, is the big number and the big takeaway attached to that number?
Yeah, first, thank you for having us here. I think the big thing in my mind is the fundamental, foundational shift that we're seeing at this moment today on three aspects. One is on consumer. We think about India as rural and urban consumers as being very different. But if you look at this report, it shows that the consumers in tier 3, tier 4 towns is as adaptable, as keen to really get on to digital. One. Second, we think of digital economy through startups. But you find in India, both large and small traditional businesses are really investing deeply and powering the digital economy forward. And third, the leap from UPI to ONDC. So I think all these three fundamental shifts, in my mind, is what stands out. So therefore, we feel very confident, and I feel personally very confident, that we are ready for the big leap as India in getting to a $1 trillion digital economy.
You know, speaking of that big leap, Vishesh, and I'll put that question to you because, you know, as the report says, we are currently in the midst of a digital decade. And the question now is, 2030, do we get to that $1 trillion? And the report believes that we will get to that $1 trillion in terms of the internet economy. The big takeaway for you and the biggest number that you're going to focus on?
So thank you, Shireen, for having me on the show. I think, you know, there are a lot of important numbers in the report, right? Obviously, you have the 1 trillion, you have all the statistics that you just spoke about. To me, the fundamental underpinning is actually a very different number, right? For me, the most important number in the report is the per capita GDP of
going from $2,500 to $5,000.
Exactly, $5,500, because that is the underpinning of not just the internet economy in India, but of Indian growth as a whole, right, across sectors. And I'm personally quite confident that we will get there. Our trajectory is very good. But, you know, if you were to point a gun at my head and say, what's the biggest risk to the numbers in this report being achieved, I would say it is that $5,500 of per capita GDP. Because it's not just the absolute number, the complexion of what people do, how they consume, once they hit, you know, $2,500 per capita GDP, changes very materially. From a very essentials-driven consumption spend, it moves a lot into discretionary spends. And that is actually what creates, you know, large businesses. That is what creates disproportionate value across the value chain. So to me, you know, that's the biggest number to focus on, and I'm quite confident that we get there.
It is, yes, you're right in pointing that out. It is, in fact, the biggest opportunity, but also perhaps the biggest risk at this point in time as we speak. But, you know, you've preempted the point that I was trying to raise with you, and Parijat, let's address that issue with you. You know, to the point that was made just now by Vishesh about getting from 2,500 to 5,500 by 2030, and that's really going to be the answer perhaps to bridging this gap between the addressable market and the monetizable market. Because here's also what the data tells us, that just 1% of Indians account for 45% of all flight passengers. The top 5% of Zomato's users are responsible for 33% of all orders placed on the app. Even UPI, 6.5% of UPI users are responsible for 44% of the transactions. So a lot of what this report talks about is predicated on that 2.5 becoming 5,500, correct?
So there is absolutely concentration of consumption of spend that exists today. I think behind the 2.5 to the 5,500 change is also a transition in household income that has already been underway. So, if you go back to 2015, 2018, 1 in 6 households, 1 in 7 households was upper or middle income. By 2030, we actually see that, 1 in 2 households will be middle or upper income. So yes, there will be a dispersion around that 5,500 number, but there will be many more, 200 million households, which will actually be in that category, which can, to Vishesh's point earlier, which can have a bigger consumption basket, which can afford to pay a premium, and which will actually, just engage in purchasing newer categories more frequently than they've done so far.
Yeah, and that is the bet that everybody at this point in time is making. So Sanjay, let's address this in the context of what each one of you is going to be doing in this market. And let's talk about it starting from a Google perspective. In 2020, Sundar had laid out in the context of the Google Digitization Fund 4 priorities for the Indian market. Language, of course, was one of them. And I want to understand from you, in context of those priorities and linking them to what this report is highlighting in terms of opportunities, what does the road ahead look like?
So I think, as you said, Sundar had talked about a vision for the future. And one of the big things he said at that time is that when you solve for India, you solve for the world. And really making India the innovation hub for Google. And fundamentally there, the big opportunity lies in enabling this billion Indians to interact and leverage the power of internet. So I think moving internet, and that's the effort that Google has been on for the last 5 to 7 years, to move from an English language internet to an Indian language internet. To me, that's the biggest focus area for Google in India, to enable these Indians to leverage the power of internet.
Yeah, moving to an Indian language internet is going to, of course, be crucial as well. And I want to now address that, linking it to the kinds of investments that we can expect Google to make through the digitization fund as well as your equity growth fund. What kind of opportunities do you believe that you wish to bet on in light of what the report is telling you?
So I think, one, this report says that India is going to be a story across both so-called urban, but really the Bharat, which is really going to unleash. So one investment, as I said, is around language. But I think the more important thing is that this is going to provide an opportunity for us to both serve consumers and customers at scale by using the power of technology. At Google, we believe we are the catalyst for digital transformation. So really our investment in going in and enabling fundamental technology, be it leveraging Android to make the smartphone affordable, be it into technology to enable companies, whether startups or traditional companies, to leverage the power of India or Google technology. And to those effects, the big changes we are making is investing in people capability in India. So we have grown our people capability in India for close to around 5-6x in the last 3 years. And we believe it's going to continue to invest significantly more by ensuring that we make India the innovation hub for Google.
Okay, innovation hub for Google. Parijat, I just want to pick up on this Bharat aspect, because again, this is one of those things that everybody talks about, the Bharat opportunity. What is the report telling you? Each one of you said that, look, the consumer in tier 2, tier 3 cities is now equally adaptable. Their paying capacity may be different, but they also want to move towards digital platforms. They also want to enjoy the convenience that these digital platforms allow for. But, as we look at Bharat, and it cannot be a sort of one-size-fits-all solution or a homogeneous sort of conglomerate. What are the things that we need to be mindful of?
Great. No, that's a great question. And absolutely, it is not one homogeneous market. So I think there are a few aspects that companies will need to be very thoughtful about. The first, I think, is just in terms of understanding the geographical preferences, the geographical, whether it's language, whether it's voice, whether it's, preference for brands of a particular kind, etc. So one is just understanding that at a very, granular level. The second is in terms of just rewiring their own organizations to be able to tap into this opportunity, not only to unlock the revenue, as you're saying, but to unlock this revenue in a more sustainable manner. And for that, it means going back to using more technologies, using newer technologies. NLP is one, Gen AI would be another one, where you really try and drive more productivity, more efficiency into existing operations. So I think that's going to be the second one. And the third Third, frankly, is going to be in terms of just how do they reconfigure their organizations to do this. So one is using the tools and technology.
Yeah.
The third is really just how do they change their organizations to go after this.
Right. Vishesh, and I want to address this with you in the context of what's happening with the Indian startup ecosystem, because clearly when we talk about the Indian internet economy, this is going to be one of the pillars, one of the growth drivers. Currently, in this environment where, it's hard to access funding for a lot of the startups in this universe, there is, I would imagine, what you would call creative destruction that's taking place. How much do you believe that this is going to impact the growth of the ecosystem in the near term, in the short term, and what are the opportunities that you foresee?
So I'll answer at two levels, right? One is at a slightly philosophical level, so please bear with me. But if you zoom out and if you look
when
at...
the times get tough, investors get philosophical, is it?
You're forced to. But, jokes apart, I think if you zoom out and you see, you study the nature of any progress across industries, right? It may look like it's a straight line, but actually there's a lot of ebbs and flows, right? It seldom moves like this. It always moves like this, right? And I would argue that, one causes the other. So a frenzy in optimism causes, excess funding, excess valuations, which then causes companies to, try things that, haven't been tried before because they need to grow into those valuations, which then leads to failure, which then leads to, cutting back, and which leads to investor sentiment going down. So it's all kind of part of a natural cycle. I think we are, again, I'm optimistic. I think we are at the fag end of one such cycle.
Okay.
We've seen, the biggest frenzy in our times. Again, just to zoom out, when COVID happened, everyone was caught like a deer in headlamps, right? We didn't know what was going to happen, whether our way of life would change forever. And then within 3 to 4 months, there was, a very clear impetus to certain businesses, right? The entire digital ecosystem benefited a lot. And that was partly reflexive, partly, I would say, very primitive reaction that, this is going to change the world and, let's jump in.
Yeah.
Right? That played out for a bit. The cycle that I was talking about played out for a bit. And then, COVID went away. We came back to a normal way of life. And, some of the excesses got washed out. And I think we are in that phase where, those excesses are washed out. I think we have taken the positives. The way we all work is, hopefully going to be different at all points in the future from what it was in the past. The way we consume, the way we engage, all of that is going to be different. Right, so again, I think this was, the lens that I wanted to take. That we are in tough times, but I think this creative destruction always helps in creating more sustainable companies, in creating more eternal companies, if you will. Right now, coming to the second level, which is very tactical. Across our portfolio, across the ecosystem, we are seeing a lot of M&A opportunities. So, the strong players are acquiring the weak. There are mergers happening because, there are efficiencies. You can acquire customers, better if you're together versus fighting each other. And again, that is part of the cycle, right? It's part of the creative destruction process. We are seeing that happen, and we are, in fact, actively encouraging it because that leads to better outcomes for the ecosystem as a whole.
The MG Cluster Blackstone. Drive unstoppable.
Get ready for yet another episode of India Inc. on the Move, powered by Rockwell Automation, in association with Forbes India and CNBC-TV18. Join us as industry experts explore sustainable manufacturing and reimagining India's life sciences through innovation and automation. Together, let's drive sustainable manufacturing in India with India Inc. on the Move at this time on CNBC-TV18.
Helps beat sensitivity fast. Sensodyne Rapid Relief.
Policymakers, industry leaders, global energy experts came together to discuss the roadmap towards clean energy transition at the CFest.
At arms of the government are working together to ensure sustainable is attainable.
Watch the second part on Sustainable is Attainable, an initiative by Tata Power and News 18 Network at this time.
The digital export opportunity. I mean, there's been a lot of headlines around, you know, UPI moving out of India and being adopted by other countries. We don't know how this model is going to work, what it's eventually going to mean as far as the country is concerned.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the digital export opportunity. On the service side, on the IT services side, I mean, we've seen what it's done for the Indian economy. What kind of potential do you foresee, and which are the sectors that you believe we should focus on?
Yeah. No, you're right, and it's absolutely been a great success story on the services side. You know, from the sectors that we have looked at for this report, most of them are dominated by the domestic opportunity, and you know, we also feel that that's actually good because it makes the opportunity more resilient. It makes the opportunity more, you know, contained, if you will, based on, you know, drivers that we see in here. Of course, there are sectors in here which absolutely have a significant export potential. So SaaS, for example, is one of them. It clearly, even today, is a very significant export-led opportunity. We think that is absolutely going to, you know, grow very fast, and it'll remain export-led. I think there are, you know, aspects of B2B e-commerce or B2C e-commerce where, as the models get proven in India, you know, they will become more applicable for that. The right model for a Malaysia or an Indonesia or a Vietnam is likely to be something that's actually worked in the Indian, you know, in Indian real life situations. And so that could very well be an opportunity. We haven't really gone into that, so that's potentially an upside from here on.
Right. Sanjay, you know, what I want to understand from you, and you talked about the incubation potential of India in the context of emerging technologies, and today everybody's talking about generative AI, and, you know, how much of a role is India going to play within that context? What is the role and relevance of India in an AI world?
So I think interesting question, and let me pull back and look at India from a 30,000 feet view to talk about this question. I think if I reflect back, I started working in 1991, and at that time, liberalization has just happened.
Yes.
And we became from a country which worried that can we compete, to started to compete in next 20 years, 25 years. That then 10 years after that, last 8-9 years have been all around building digital infrastructure for India as a country to really help people take or companies take the next leap. I think the next 10 years is about India innovating and using things like generative AI. Because one of the big powers that we have is the capability of talent in this country. When you look at the AI talent, India has the most competent AI talent in the world. And interestingly, we have the biggest problems to solve. And as Vishesh said, we have the income now growing from 2,500 to 5,000. That confluence of forces doesn't happen very easily. So I think we are in that interesting phase. And I do think using the power of technology like AI, I think the movement will be from India becoming what it is today to from an innovation point of view, a Bharat Nirbhar Vishwa is where I would say we are poised to leap in the next 10 years time.
Okay, that's an interesting phrase, Bharat Nirbhar Vishwa. So it's not Atma Nirbhar Bharat, but you're saying that the world is going to be dependent on India in an AI decade or era.
AI era.
Okay, why are you so confident of that?
I think just the factors that I talked about. Look at the young population of this country, willing to experiment. In which country in the world, in 5 years, you move from 0% digital payment to 40% digital payment, the highest in the world. So we have shown by demonstrating the power of embracing technology and delivering breathtaking results. So I do think that confidence of having delivered it over the last 8 years gives me the confidence. And the fact that we are now, consumer economy is opening up. These two powers coming together.
So how Bharat Nirbhar will Bad be? I mean, what are the odds on that?
Correct. It's like, I think, or Indian language-led generative AI. That's where the power will unleash. How do we use the power of this technology to help every Indian, be it in a small town or a village, is where we'll really unleash the power.
Vishesh, let's put your money where your mouth is, right? Okay, so you believe that this is a great story. It's a story that, has a lot of headroom for growth. Temasek has been investing, about $1 billion plus in India over the past 5-6 years now. About 5% of your global, almost $300 billion portfolio is your India portfolio. So what are the kind of bets that you are going to make, given what you believe, given the thesis that has been laid down today?
So, we have a fairly diverse portfolio, as you know. A large part of it is in the tech and consumer space, which is where, all the excitement happens, which is where daily disruption, creative destruction, new business models emerge. And for us, it is important to be active participants in that space because it impacts not just value creation within that segment, but it actually impacts value creation in a lot of traditional old economy companies. I think we spoke during the session earlier about how fintech, payments is enabling unlock of credit to a large number of MSMEs, which was not present earlier. Yeah. And the biggest beneficiaries of this is actually, guess what? The banks and the NBFCs, right, which are already large parts of our portfolio. So for us, how health tech is going to impact hospitals, how social media is going to impact, how people shop, how, AI is going to impact IT services. These are all very important and fundamental questions to stay on top of. So I think to answer your question specifically, we continue to see opportunities across the spectrum. We continue to see value in old economy companies. We continue to be very, very focused on technology, on the consumer space. Within that, we have made a lot of investments on D2C models. Yeah. We have made a lot of investments in health, wellness, in fintech, in healthcare delivery. So I think we will continue to see opportunities across the spectrum, and we are happy to put more dollars where our mouth is.
So the billion will double, triple. What will happen to it over the next 10 years?
Look, I mean, this requires a crystal ball to gaze, but but we are also very bottom-up investors, right? So we are, right. Opportunities. When a good opportunity comes up, we are able to put billions of dollars into it, as you've seen, and then we can also do a 20 million small investment just to see how something. So I won't put a number to it, but I think we're quite optimistic.
Fair enough. Parijat, I want to pick up on what we just heard there from Vishesh and link it to what Sanjay mentioned as well. So we've gone from UPI now to ONDC, and there's been a path in terms of regulation, in terms of creating a much more facilitative environment and an enabling environment. What are the lessons to be learned from the previous decade? And as we look forward, what are the recommendations that you believe we need to factor in to ensure that everything that we've just spoken about is in fact realized?
Yeah. I think there's a few learnings from the previous decade for sure. So I think the investments in the public digital infrastructure, I don't think we would have probably visualized the benefits or the potential applications of that at the very start. And I think that goes back to what Sanjay was making around innovation. And the innovation builds on itself. You build something, somebody else comes and builds on top of the public infrastructure. There's a new application, and so on. So I think that there is a positive virtuous cycle of that innovation, which we are absolutely going to see, and we need to continue to, as you said, make sure that there is a enabling regulatory environment to that. There is absolutely, I think, questions around security, around privacy that we all need to be mindful of, and especially as we go into into an environment where data is extremely valuable. I think that needs to be something that's important, that we figure out what the right use and the guardrails for that are. I think there's also an element around just making sure that, and we've come a long way around how do we make sure that this digital opportunity is inclusive. It's available to to the broader the citizens of this country, and not just remains a part of the first few 100 million in the metros. So I think those are some of the elements that we absolutely, as stakeholders, as involved stakeholders, need to make sure we ensure.
We've talked about the opportunities as well as the headroom for growth, but in terms of risks, and some of the risks were articulated there, some are of course on the regulatory side, but others including things like data protection, cyber security, cyber crime, and we're seeing a sharp move up as we move into a digital economy on that front as well. Your thoughts on that and what you believe needs to be done?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you make. Innovation is core to this industry's growth, but we also need to realize that fundamentally digital has become core to our existence. Doesn't matter whether we are sitting in an urban city or in a rural village. And if 1 billion Indians are putting their trust on internet, we need to be ensuring that this is responsible. But more importantly, we keep every Indian safe. So to me, that's the most important thing to solve for. Regulatory or any other moves that we make as companies, at the core of it, that needs to be the fundamental thing. We enable innovation, but innovation alone is not enough. So I think it needs to work in tandem with safety. And safety could be cyber safety, privacy, data. It could be how to ensure that people have the trust to continue to invest their time and energy and resources into internet. And as Google, we believe that is the really important thing. When we think about India, our mission in India is to make internet helpful. But second thing we say is safer for 1 billion Indians.
So what is the priority on making it safer, accessible, inclusive? We've talked about. How do you make it safer, from a company perspective?
I think the reality is the new internet users who come on board are vulnerable fundamentally. They have not been on internet before. They're using it for the first time. They're using it to do transactions, put their money in. So ensuring that everybody who puts their money in, whether buying something or transacting or putting their data, that's kept safe. So enabling our products and platforms to keep the data safe, ensuring that that data is not misused, even by mistake by someone else, ensuring that people get to understand that what they're doing and enabling them to learn. And finally, ensuring that what is also happening is that as internet takes root, there are bad forces at play. There are people who are trying to misuse data or misuse information to take money off it. And that's a very high ROI for bad actors. Keeping them in check is extremely important. So as at Google and I think as internet players, we need to really invest time and energy in solving for it. And that's what we are doing at Google very, very deeply.
Final questions, Vishesh, I'll start by asking you, you've made a lot of projections in this report on what is likely to happen as far as B2C is concerned, B2B, D2C, and so on and so forth. Of that list of verticals and growth, what do you feel most confident about?
That's a good question. I think I feel confident about the overall number, about the 1 trillion. Whether we get there in 2030 or we get there sooner or we get there later, is subject to a lot of other factors. I think, we did a fairly exhaustive investor survey. The sectors that stood out most were SaaS, which I believe is going to be a huge opportunity with all the changes happening in generative AI, in all the talent development happening in the country. So I'm quite optimistic about that. I think B2C and B2B e-commerce will remain the largest part of the pie. So clearly a big focus area for all investors, and especially with the consumption unlock that's going to happen. And then fintech as the enabler that that allows for a lot of these things to start getting the virtuous cycle underway.
That's the big takeaway, right? B2C e-commerce is the disproportionate share
That's the big takeaway in terms of the B2C e-commerce being a very significant contributor to the overall number. And I think what Vishesh was saying in terms of the smart money is actually saying these four sectors are going to be the more stable ones, or where you can be more confident. I think it's also helpful that some of these are also already more established. So, while there are others which are still on the cusp of taking off, or, models are being tried out, in here, I think we have a few years of what's worked, what's not worked, what are the learnings from there. I think that's already come in these four sectors.
So consensus, 1 trillion internet economy by 2030. The three of you are sticking your neck out on this one.
So I would just add on to that, to be honest. I'm an optimist, and I'm a deep believer of idea of India. And I feel this is our moment as India. The question in my mind is, do we get to $1 trillion by 2030 or earlier?
Or earlier. Well, that's a great note to end this conversation on. Sanjay, Vishesh and Parijat, many thanks for joining us here on the CNBC-TV18 special and for taking us through some of the takeaways and insights based on the data that the Google Bain Temasek report has unveiled. On that note, it is time for us to say goodbye. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned. The news continues here on CNBC-TV18.